more needs to be done. Let's talk to Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray, who joins us now. A very good morning to you. Good to see you, as always. As an example, Stuart says this morning, well, look, with Suella Braverman, it's good to have someone telling the truth.
I think the problem is that Suella Braverman just feels out of control. She's using language which I don't think the Home Secretary should be using. I think it's inflaming community tensions. I think it's not helping the police to do their job in a sensitive situation. What she should be doing is supporting the police to go after those who perpetrate hate crime or extremism, whilst not using her language to ramp up community tensions. And frankly, I just think it shows that she's not the right person to be doing this job. And Rishi Sunak probably knows that. What it also shows is that he's a weak prime minister, because if he doesn't agree with what she's saying, he should sack her.
But, yes, you would argue that, wouldn't you? Because, he can't, he looks weak if he sacks her, and you might argue he looks weak if he doesn't. So what could he possibly do is right? Keir Starmer has said it's time for a change, but at the moment we need some sort of stability, particularly over the next 3 days, don't we?
Well, I think the Conservatives have shown they're completely incapable of providing either stability on the one hand or the change that they concede the country needs. Remember, Rishi Sunak said at his conference, I think it was, that the country needs change. What we saw in the King's speech earlier this week is that the government are simply incapable of providing that change. So, frankly, Rishi Sunak is in a mess, because he can't bring himself to say that he agrees with what Suella Braverman said, but he also can't seem to bring himself to sack her. And frankly, the country needs stronger, stable leadership, and that's what we would offer going to the next general election.
But in terms of stability, you've got your own problems, haven't you? The Labour Party, whether parliamentary or wider spread, can't work out if it wants to call for a ceasefire in Israel and Gaza or not.
No, that's not true.
Of course it's true. Forgive me. Of course it's true. You've got councillors resigning across the country. You've got shadow ministers resigning over this issue. Of course it's a problem.
Look, there's no denying the fact that there are different opinions within the Labour Party about the approach to trying to end the suffering that we're seeing in Gaza and that follows the appalling terrorist attacks in Israel. Now, some people, as you said, are calling for a ceasefire, but Keir Starmer has set out very clearly what our position is, which is to call for humanitarian pauses, which we think are the most achievable way to alleviate some of the immediate suffering of Palestinians in Gaza. So we're calling for humanitarian pauses, for hostages to be released. And I think, there are different opinions across the Labour Party. Those opinions have been voiced, but Keir Starmer has listened to what people had to say and has set out our way forward.
And do you think that's right, that basically he has listened to what people have to say, he's asked for humanitarian pauses, which are now happening, but he's not saying anything stronger than that?
Well, what he's been saying for days and weeks now is that those humanitarian pauses need to happen urgently to make sure that aid can get in to help Palestinians who are suffering in Gaza. He's also been very clear we need to support Israel's right to defend itself, to rescue hostages, to make sure its people are safe. And I think through this, very difficult, desperate situation where we've seen, huge suffering of the Israelis who were attacked in the terrorist attacks, and now suffering of people in Gaza as a result of the humanitarian catastrophe there. What Keir Starmer is setting out is the way through that. He's showing leadership in saying what we need now is immediate humanitarian pauses, because that's the most achievable, the quickest way to get that aid in there to help Palestinians in Gaza.
What do you think should be happening with the pro-Palestinian rally this weekend? Do you think it should be allowed to go ahead? Do you think the police are being even-handed or a bit of a light touch with people who are perhaps chanting things which are anti-Semitic, which are even perhaps pro-Hamas? What would you like to see happen?
I think that any instances of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, hate crime, extremism need to be met with the full force of the law. But in terms of how the police protests, how they police the marches, and how they decide to act, and is an operational decision for the police. Now, that operational independence is a very long established principle in the UK. It's one that, frankly, Suella Braverman is riding roughshod over at the moment with her approach and her language. But I think that operational independence is a really crucial part of our system. And what I would say is, this weekend we have a right to protest in this country. At the same time, the events this weekend, the armistice, the 2-minute silence, the Remembrance Sunday events are really important days in our national calendar. We need to make sure those events are protected and respected. I want the police to do whatever they need to do to make sure those events are protected. But in terms of the operational decisions, that is for them to take. And I think that's the right balance to have in this situation.
What's your gut feeling? I mean, do you fear that there may be violence tomorrow?
Well, look, I don't want there to be violence. I don't think politicians should do anything which in any way stirs up division or tensions. I think it's for the police to make their operational decision based on the evidence about what the best way is to police what's going to be happening in London over the weekend, to try and minimise the likelihood of any clashes. And frankly, I think it's for politicians to try and avoid stirring up any of the difficulties, avoid stirring up divisions, and try and bring communities together, and crucially to support the police in their operational decisions to try and get through this very sensitive situation.
Yeah, but doesn't she have a valid point? We've been talking to a former Met detective all morning who has said that there is a valid point in saying that some things which have been policed, like Just Stop Oil protests, for example, or Extinction Rebellion stuff, has been handled in a very different way to other things. That there is a sort of light touch to the way the police are responding to a lot of protests at the moment, and it is a sign of double standards.
Well, again, I don't think it's right for politicians to give a running commentary on police operational decisions. The politicians can set the framework through which the police operate, but ultimately the operational decisions is for the police to decide, and they will do that based on evidence and intelligence that they have at their disposal, and work out what the best way is to maintain the peace. And this weekend it's going to be a very sensitive situation because of the protests, and because we want to make sure that the Armistice Day 2-minute silence and the Remembrance Sunday events are fully protected. The objectives that we should support as politicians is to make sure that, for instance, Armistice Day, Remembrance Sunday events are fully protected. But in terms of how that's done, that's an operational decision for the police. And I think that's the right separation to have in our system.
You say to the marchers who are going to be marching tomorrow?
Sorry, could you say that again?
What would you say to the people who are going to march tomorrow, for whatever cause? What would you say to them now?
Well, it's not for me to address them directly. I think there is a right to protest, but also we need to make sure that the events over the Remembrance weekend are fully protected and respected. That's what I want to see happen. I will be in Greenford, in my local area, this Sunday, laying a wreath. I'll be at Ealing Town Hall for the 2-minute silence on Saturday. That is really important to me. It's really important to many of my constituents. And obviously there are events in central London, which I want to make sure are protected and respected. Now, alongside that, we have a very sensitive situation, a lot of community tension, right to protest. Let's let the police make those operational decisions about how to get through this sensitive weekend.
OK. James Murray, Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury. Appreciate your time today. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. In fact, you look at the Mirror, which I think is a very good front page, actually.
It's interesting, the Mirror's front page, yes.
They're basically talking about the fact that it is Remembrance Sunday on Sunday, and it's Armistice Day tomorrow. And they do say there to the marchers, remember who won you these freedoms. And I think that's so important to remember.
Yeah, but it's how they put it in context. They say they fought and died for our freedom of speech and thought and protest. To Suella Braverman, how dare you try to take that away? To the marchers, remember who won you these freedoms. To Britain, we must all resist cynical efforts to whip up hatred. I mean, it's interesting that they take on all sides of that.
It's very even-handed, isn't it?